In 2001, Michael Jackson stood before an audience at Oxford University and spoke about something far removed from record sales, awards, or sold-out stadiums. He spoke about treehouses, water balloon fights, games of hide-and-seek, the small, ordinary experiences most children receive without ever realizing how precious they are. Then Michael described himself with one devastating sentence. He was the product of a lack of a childhood. That confession changes the way we see the little boy America first met. Under the stage lights, young Michael appeared fearless. He smiled, spun across the floor, and sang with an emotional power that seemed impossible for someone so young. The audience saw joy. They saw confidence. They saw a child who appeared born to perform, but behind that smile was a boy, watching ordinary childhood happen around him. While other children played outside, Michael rehearsed. While they formed friendships at school, he traveled between performances. While they were allowed to make mistakes, Michael learned that one misstep could bring disappointment. Music genuinely made him happy. But before he was old enough to understand fame, his talent had become tied to discipline, responsibility, and the hopes of an entire family. The world was watching a star being born. Michael was quietly losing the life he would spend years trying to recreate. And it began inside a tiny house in Gary, Indiana, when the youngest performer in the room became the family's greatest hope. Before we return to the small house in Gary, where Michael's childhood began, take a moment to like this video and subscribe to the channel. Here, we look beyond the records, performances, and headlines to understand the human experiences that shaped some of the world's most unforgettable entertainers. And Michael's story didn't begin with stadiums or screaming crowds. It began in a crowded family home, where a little boy's extraordinary voice would soon carry the hopes of everyone around him. Michael Jackson's story began inside a small, two-bedroom house in Gary, Indiana. It wasn't the kind of place anyone would associate with private theaters, giant concert stages, or screaming crowds. It was a crowded, working-class family home, where 9 surviving Jackson children were raised by Joseph and Katherine Jackson. There was little privacy. Beds, clothing, voices, responsibilities, and ambitions all existed close together. Someone was always moving through the room. Someone needed attention. Someone was practicing, arguing, laughing, cleaning, or trying to find a quiet corner that barely existed. Joseph worked at a steel mill and also played guitar. Katherine sang and played music as well, bringing warmth and melody into the home. Before Michael became the center of the family's musical ambitions, music was already part of the household's daily language. Michael was born on August 29, 1958. He wasn't the oldest brother. He wasn't the strongest voice in the house yet. At first, he was simply the little boy watching the older Jackson brothers rehearse. He watched their feet. He studied their expressions. He listened to the way their voices came together. And like many younger children, he wanted to be included in what the older ones were doing. But Michael wasn't only copying them. Even at a very young age, he showed an unusual understanding of rhythm and performance. He didn't merely remember a song. He seemed to feel where it needed to rise, where it needed to soften, and where an audience would respond. The small house gave Michael almost nowhere to disappear, but it also placed him close enough to the music that would soon change his position in the family forever. Because once the Jacksons heard the youngest performer sing, he could no longer remain in the background. Michael joined his brothers while he was still a very young child. He was smaller than the others, but the moment he stepped forward, size stopped mattering. His voice carried an emotional weight that didn't seem to belong to someone his age. He could imitate the movements of adult entertainers, respond instinctively to rhythm, and command attention without appearing to force it. The brothers already had talent, but Michael gave the group something different, a center. An audience might admire the older boy's harmonies, musicianship, and coordinated movements. Then Michael would begin singing, and people would naturally look toward him. That attention changed his role inside the family. He was no longer only the youngest brother trying to keep up. He became the lead singer, the one standing at the front, the one expected to deliver the emotional center of the song, the one whose voice could turn a respectable family performance into something people remembered. Motown's history of the group describes Michael as the youngest son and the lightning rod lead singer whose presence helped distinguish the brothers from other young acts. The music itself gave Michael genuine joy. That part of his childhood shouldn't be erased. He loved singing. He loved movement. He loved the moment when music connected him to an audience. The tragedy wasn't that Michael possessed a talent he didn't want. It was that something he loved gradually became connected to everything he feared losing. A mistake no longer affected only him. A weak performance could disappoint his brothers. It could frustrate his father. It could cost the group an opportunity. And as the family's ambitions grew, the emotional weight placed on the smallest boy in the room grew with them. Michael was learning that his voice made him special. He was also learning that being special came with responsibilities no ordinary child was expected to carry. The performances looked effortless because the preparation wasn't. After school, the Jackson brothers rehearsed under their father's direction. Songs were repeated, steps were corrected, entrances were sharpened. Smiles, gestures, harmonies, and movements were practiced until the group could reproduce them under pressure. Joseph understood that talent alone wouldn't be enough. The boys needed discipline, they needed timing, they needed to look professional before anyone in the music industry would take a working-class family group from Gary seriously. Michael later gave his father credit for that training. He recognized that Joseph spent time, energy, and money developing the group and teaching his sons how to survive on stage, but Michael also described the discipline as frightening. In his autobiography, he recalled physical punishment when mistakes were made and a relationship with his father that could become turbulent. In his later Oxford speech, Michael again spoke about the emotional distance he felt between himself and Joseph. These were Michael's own descriptions of his childhood, and they reveal why rehearsal carried far more tension than an ordinary family music session. Outside the house, another life continued. Children played in yards. They made up games with no audience watching. They could lose, laugh, argue, become distracted, and begin again without believing the future of their family depended on the result. Inside, Michael repeated the same movement until it was correct. A child normally learns through mistakes. Michael learned to fear them. The sharper the Jackson 5 became, the more natural their performances appeared. Audiences would eventually see five brothers smiling, moving together and making difficult choreography look joyful. They wouldn't see the hours behind it. They wouldn't see the child listening for criticism after the music stopped. They wouldn't see how quickly play had been replaced by preparation. Michael was becoming an exceptional performer, but the training that helped create that performer was also teaching him that love, approval, and safety could feel connected to perfection. The Jackson brothers began entering local competitions and performing wherever opportunities appeared. Each victory opened another door, a better venue, a larger audience, a new contact, another person who might know someone connected to the music business. The family wasn't suddenly wealthy because Michael could sing. Success came gradually, and every brother contributed to the group. Jackie, Tito, Jermaine, Marlon, and Michael had to function as a unit. Their harmonies, instruments, discipline, and coordinated performance created the complete act. But Michael's importance was becoming impossible to ignore. He could make an audience lean forward. He could sing lyrics written from an adult emotional perspective and somehow make them believable. He could watch established performers, absorb their movements, and return to the stage with something that felt like his own. The family's hopes increasingly gathered around that ability. Michael was still young enough to want approval from his parents, young enough to measure success through the expression on his father's face, young enough to enjoy the excitement of winning. But he was also becoming aware that the performances meant more than applause. Music represented a possible escape from the limitations surrounding the family and Gary. It could provide a different home, a different future, a life beyond steel mill work and financial uncertainty. That possibility created pride. It also created pressure. Michael wasn't simply singing because he enjoyed the song. He was singing while carrying his brother's ambitions, his father's plans, his mother's hopes, and the possibility that the entire family's life could change. He didn't create that responsibility alone, but his talent became central to it. Every victory made the dream feel closer. Every strong performance confirmed that the smallest Jackson might be the family's greatest advantage, and every step toward success carried Michael farther from the freedom of being only a child. Long before Michael entered a Motown recording studio, he had already begun living according to an adult schedule. The Jackson brothers performed at talent contests, local events, clubs, and other venues where young Michael was surrounded by people much older than he was. He saw how entertainers prepared backstage. He watched performers control a room. He learned when to smile, when to speak, and how to hold an audience that might not have arrived expecting to care about a group of children from Gary. These nights became another form of education. Michael learned stagecraft before most children learned how to manage ordinary friendships. He learned how to recover when equipment failed, how to keep performing when he was tired, how to read the energy of strangers, how to deliver the same song with excitement even after repeating it again and again. Then came the journey home. The stage lights disappeared. The applause ended. The brothers returned to cars and long roads, carrying costumes, instruments, and the exhaustion that followed the performance. Michael might have looked like a confident adult under the lights, but when the show ended, he was still a child who needed sleep. The difference was that childhood requirements didn't control the schedule. The performance did. He couldn't simply say he wasn't in the mood. He couldn't decide he would rather stay home and play. Other people were waiting. His brothers were depending on him. His father had arranged the opportunity. And every show seemed connected to the larger possibility of being discovered. Michael was growing up among adult expectations. The adults around him could see an extraordinary performer developing. What they couldn't return to him was the time being exchanged for that development. The Jackson 5 recorded for the local Steeltown label before auditioning for Motown in 1968. By 1969, they were signed to the company that had built the careers of some of America's most important black artists. For the Jackson family, this was the door they'd been trying to reach. But Motown wasn't simply a recording studio where the brothers could arrive, sing once, and return home. It was a carefully managed professional system. Songs had to be selected and recorded. Choreography had to be polished. Wardrobes had to be created. Interviews had to be controlled. Photographs had to present the correct image. The brothers needed to appear energetic, coordinated, cheerful, and ready at almost any hour. Michael stood at the center of that system. Motown's producers recognized that his voice could carry songs written from emotional experiences far beyond his age. On I Want You Back, Michael reached the demanding high notes and delivered the song with urgency, rather than sounding like a child merely repeating adult words. The public saw freshness. The record company saw enormous potential. Michael experienced both excitement and increasing responsibility. The dream was finally becoming real. But professional success didn't restore the freedom he had already lost. It intensified the schedule. More rehearsals, more recording, more photographs, more expectations, more people whose jobs now depended on the group succeeding. The family left Gary for California as the Jackson 5 moved toward national fame. The house became larger, the opportunities became greater, and the audiences became louder. But Michael's time belonged to him less than ever. Motown opened the door to a life millions would envy. What waited on the other side was work, without the protection of anonymity. Michael continued receiving an education. But receiving lessons wasn't the same as living an ordinary school life. As fame grew, tutors and private study replaced much of the normal classroom experience. Michael later described doing several hours of schoolwork before going directly into the recording studio, where he might remain until it was time to sleep. He also remembered looking across from a studio and seeing children playing in a park. He wanted to join them. Instead, he had to return to work. That image captures the difference between education and childhood. A tutor could teach Michael mathematics, history, and reading. A tutor couldn't give him the feeling of belonging to a classroom where nobody cared how many records he had sold. A lesson could keep him academically prepared. It couldn't replace friendships formed through ordinary repetition. The same faces every morning, the same lunch table, the same walk home. Michael saw children playing from car windows in studio buildings. He saw a world where time seemed loose. Children ran without choreography. They shouted without microphones. They played games nobody would review in a newspaper the following morning. He didn't necessarily hate the studio. Music remained one of the places where Michael felt most alive. But love for music didn't cancel the sadness of watching other children live freely. Both feelings could exist at once. He could be grateful for his talent and exhausted by its demands. He could enjoy performing and still wish he had friends outside the family. He could love the audience and still wonder what it felt like to be unknown. Millions of children would soon copy Michael's clothes, hair, voice, and dance movements. Some would imagine that becoming Michael Jackson was the greatest childhood anyone could receive. And sometimes, Michael looked through the glass and wished he could become one of them. I Want You Back reached #1 in early 1970. Then came ABC. Then The Love You Save. Then I'll Be There. The Jackson 5 became the first act to send its first 4 charted singles to #1 on the Billboard Hot 100. I'll Be There remained at the top for 5 weeks. The achievement was extraordinary. So was the speed. In a short period, the brothers moved from local performances to national television, major arenas, tours, magazine covers, merchandise, television specials, and an animated series. Jackson Mania had begun. Michael's voice was suddenly everywhere. Children played Jackson 5 records in their bedrooms. Families watched the brothers on television. Audiences screamed as soon as Michael appeared. But fame changed the meaning of an ordinary encounter. A child approaching Michael might genuinely like him, or that child might want to meet the boy from television. Adults might praise him because they cared, or because Michael had become commercially valuable. The difficulty was knowing the difference. Privacy disappeared before Michael was old enough to understand why he might need it. He couldn't enter a room as simply another boy. His image arrived first. People expected the smile they recognized, the energy, the confidence, the voice. Even exhaustion had to remain behind the curtain. The boy who once competed for his father's approval now faced the expectations of an entire industry. Millions knew his name, but recognition didn't create a safe place where he could stop performing. Success had given Michael everything a young entertainer might dream about. It had also made hiding almost impossible. Michael's relationship with his father contained a painful contradiction. He understood what Joseph had accomplished. Joseph had recognized the boy's potential, organized rehearsals, found opportunities, demanded professionalism, and refused to let the family accept the limitations placed around them. Without that determination, the Jackson 5 story might have been very different. Michael later acknowledged that training, but gratitude didn't erase the emotional distance he felt. In his Oxford speech, Michael said he had wanted ordinary signs of affection from his father: play, warmth, praise, and the kind of physical closeness a child shouldn't have to earn. Then he remembered one small moment. When Michael was about 4, his father placed him on a pony at a carnival. That was all. No stadium, no award, no recording contract. Just a father, lifting his young son and placing him on a pony. Michael said the gesture remained with him because moments like it were so rare. That memory reveals what the child inside him had been waiting for. Not wealth, not fame, not perfection. Attention that didn't depend on performance. Affection that arrived without a successful rehearsal. The pony ride may have lasted only minutes, but Michael carried it into adulthood because children measure love differently from adults. A brief moment can become enormous when there are too few others like it. Joseph helped build the discipline that shaped one of history's greatest performers. Michael also believed that something essential had been missing between them. The world celebrated everything Joseph's training produced. Michael remembered the small act that asked nothing from him. Michael was rarely physically alone. His brothers traveled with him. Tutors taught him. Musicians surrounded him. Managers planned his days. Fans waited outside. Photographers followed. Executives discussed his future. Yet a person can be constantly surrounded and still feel lonely. Michael later said his brothers had been his childhood friends because ordinary friendships were difficult to build. There were no simple slumber parties or neighborhood companions who knew him before the records. His brothers understood the work. They knew the rehearsals, travel, expectations, and discipline. But even among them, Michael carried a unique burden. He was the youngest, the lead singer, the face audiences watched most closely, the child expected to express adult emotions on command. People praised his ability to sound heartbroken, devoted, joyful, or desperate. But there were few private spaces where Michael could understand his own emotions without needing to turn them into a performance. The public knew his voice. They didn't necessarily know the boy carrying it, and the more famous that boy became, the more difficult it was to discover who wanted Michael and who wanted access to Michael Jackson. The applause offered connection. Then the show ended. The crowd disappeared, and the people remaining often needed something from him: a recording, an interview, a rehearsal, a photograph, another smile. Childhood fame gave Michael extraordinary companionship in public. It didn't guarantee that he felt understood in private. Michael's voice created an unusual illusion. He sounded experienced before he had lived the experiences described in the songs. He could sing about romantic regret, abandonment, devotion, and heartbreak with the conviction of someone much older. Listeners heard maturity. What they were hearing was instinct. Michael understood how to shape emotion through sound. He knew when to hold a note, when to break a phrase, when to add urgency, and when to make a lyric feel personal. That ability became increasingly valuable. The industry wanted more. More Jackson 5 recordings, more television performances, more tours, more publicity. Then Motown began developing Michael as a solo performer, while he continued working with his brothers. At 12, he recorded "Got to Be There." His early solo career soon produced major hits, including "Ben," his first solo #1. The success proved that Michael didn't need to disappear inside the group. He could carry a record alone, but that discovery added another layer of responsibility to a schedule that was already consuming most of his time. His childhood wasn't taken in one dramatic moment. There was no single morning when someone announced that it had ended. It disappeared gradually. One rehearsal, one recording session, one flight, one interview, one concert, one photograph, one adult obligation after another. By the time Michael was old enough to look back, the missing years couldn't be returned. He had recordings that preserved his voice at every age, but recordings preserve performances. They don't preserve the afternoons a child never had. As an adult, Michael surrounded himself with many of the things associated with childhood: games, animals, cartoons, amusement rides, a theater, fantasy. Neverland Ranch eventually became the most visible expression of that fascination. A private property transformed into a space containing entertainment, animals, and attractions usually associated with amusement parks. It would be too simple to claim that one childhood wound explains every adult choice Michael made. Human beings aren't equations. A difficult childhood doesn't provide a complete explanation for an entire life. But Michael himself repeatedly connected his adult fascination with play to the childhood experiences he had missed. He said he loved amusement parks and games because his early years had been dominated by work. With adult wealth, he could finally build the spaces he once watched from a distance. He could create a theater, buy rides, care for animals, fill rooms with objects associated with wonder. But childhood cannot be purchased later. An adult can ride a carousel. He cannot become an unknown 8-year-old whose afternoon carries no financial consequences. He can build a giant play area. He cannot recreate the safety of growing up without strangers judging every movement. He can invite laughter into a property. He cannot return to the park across from the recording studio and join the children at the exact moment he first saw them. Michael could construct the setting. Time had removed the original experience. Perhaps that's why the search never seemed completely finished. He wasn't only collecting objects associated with childhood, he was reaching toward a feeling, the feeling that time belonged to him. At Oxford University in 2001, Michael finally described the missing childhood in direct terms. By then, he had achieved almost everything the boy from Gary had once been working toward. He had global recognition, creative influence, historic recordings, wealth, awards, a level of fame few human beings had experienced. But when Michael spoke about childhood, he didn't begin with those achievements. He remembered ordinary games, tree houses, water balloons, hide and seek, the sound of other children playing. He remembered the pony ride with his father. He remembered wanting affection that didn't have to be earned through performance. And yet Michael's speech wasn't simply an attack on Joseph. He tried to understand the man who had raised him. Michael considered the possibility that his father's own upbringing, fears, responsibilities, and limited emotional language had shaped the way he treated his children. He said he had chosen forgiveness. Forgiveness didn't mean the pain had never happened. It didn't transform harsh memories into happy ones. It meant Michael no longer wanted the wound to be the only connection between himself and his father. That distinction matters. He could recognize Joseph's discipline and ambition. He could understand the pressure his father had carried. He could appreciate the career that training helped create. And he could still grieve for the affection the child inside him had wanted. Michael had spent a lifetime being watched. At Oxford, he asked the audience to listen, not to the superstar, to the boy behind him. Now return to the young Michael standing beneath the stage lights. His brothers are beside him. His father is watching. The musicians begin. Michael steps forward. He smiles at exactly the right moment. His voice rises through the room with a confidence no child should have been expected to possess. The audience sees a star being born. They see excitement, talent, joy, possibility. But somewhere beyond the stage is another version of Michael. A boy building a treehouse badly because nobody needs it to be perfect. A boy losing a game and laughing. A boy running through water without choreography. A boy walking home from school, beside friends who don't ask him to sing. A boy whose father places him on a pony, then stays beside him long enough for the moment to feel ordinary. That version of Michael never fully existed. The world received something extraordinary in his place. A child who could sing with an adult's emotional power. A performer whose discipline appeared almost impossible. A young star capable of changing his family's future. But behind that achievement was a boy watching childhood move beyond his reach. And perhaps that's why Michael spent so much of his adult life trying to find it again. If this story helped you see Michael Jackson beyond the records, performances, and headlines, take a moment to like the video and subscribe to the channel. Here, we explore the carefully documented moments that reveal the people behind the famous images. And in the comments, tell us which part of Michael's early life changed the way you understand him, because the world remembers the child who could sing like an adult. But behind that extraordinary voice was a little boy who never stopped wondering what an ordinary childhood might have felt like.